And if you're staying in here, open your Bible to John 21, John chapter 21. We're not beginning a new series today. We are beginning a new year. And here we are again. Seems like it comes around with shocking regularity, doesn't it? Where we say, well, here we are beginning again. 2024. I have a folder on my computer called Sermons. And within that folder are lots of other folders organized by year. If you look at the 2023 folder, it's full of other folders, each with a date corresponding to every Sunday from last year. All 53 of them. That's right. There were 53 Sundays last year. It happens occasionally. We preachers call it the bonus Sunday. It's because God knew that 2023 was going to be that way for some of you. You needed an extra sermon in that year. But that means that this week I created a new folder. It's called 2024, and it's completely empty. It's a blank slate. And it struck me as a very symbolic, slightly daunting thing. A blank slate, a new year waiting to be filled. Here we are beginning again with school and beginning again with work and with a new year that has lots of potential but also lots of unknowns. That's kind of the trade-off. You get lots of potential in a new year but lots of uncertainty and unknowns about how the year is going to be filled in. And so I'm the kind of person usually who can't help but feel a little bit optimistic about things. I'm kind of a sunshine person. And I feel hopeful generally about how things will work out. I naturally believe things will go well. But even I can't shake the feeling of the blank folder calling out to me saying, you've got work to do. Prove yourself again. You should do more this year. You're not doing enough this year. You should spend less this year and eat better. And your kids eat too much sugar. And you could use your time better. And there's this nagging pull around the new year towards continual self-improvement. And you say, you got all that from a blank folder? Well, not really. I think our culture right now is sort of obsessed with self-improvement, actually. From productivity hacks to mindfulness apps, the pressure to create a better version of yourself is relentless. Be better, do better. There are a million things that you could be doing better. And I can show you how, usually for $39.95, or subscribe to my Instagram and my YouTube channel, and I will tell you how to do them all. Here's the things that you need to do better. You could be more efficient with this or that. Here's how to pack your kids' lunches better. See, you could be a better mom. There's so much pressure to become. There's no room left to be. Even in the way that we approach God, it's often through the filter of self-improvement or what we're doing bad at. Do better this time. Pray more. I've never heard anybody say, you know what? I think I'm all prayed up. I don't need to pray anymore. I've filled my quota. I don't need to pray. No, everybody thinks they need to pray more. That's okay. And what I want us to see this morning is at the point of the greatest story of failure in the Gospels, the invitation is not to just do better this time. It's to begin again to follow Jesus. And that is found in John chapter 21, where we find out about Peter. And Peter, before we read it, I really feel like I should give you some background on Peter, even though you know Peter pretty well, right? Because he's the most prominent character in all of the Gospels except for Jesus. In fact, the first gospel ever written, the Gospel of Mark, was Peter's testimony, written because of Peter and based on his eyewitness accounts. Peter is referred to almost 200 times in the New Testament. Just to compare that to John, another one of Jesus' closest followers, John is only mentioned 31 times in the New Testament. Peter was part of the inner circle of the group of the 12 disciples. The inner circle, we call them the inner three, maybe Peter, James, and John. But Peter was the leader. He was always named first and mentioned in any lists where the disciples are named. He's first. He's the first disciple that's called by Jesus to follow me. Besides Jesus, Peter is basically the central character in a lot of the stories that we read in the Gospels. You know, when Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up the mountain where his glory is going to be revealed at the Transfiguration, it's really a kind of scene where Peter speaks up, and it's a scene about how Peter is kind of misunderstanding what they're doing there. He wants to hang out. Peter is the only one who attempts to walk on water. That kind of becomes a story about Peter in some of the Gospels. The walking on water scene is dominated by this interaction between Jesus and Peter. Peter's the only one of the disciples who's given a brand new name by Jesus. Isn't that interesting? And also the parts where Jesus washes the disciples' feet, that's actually a scene about an interaction between Peter and Jesus, because Peter doesn't want Jesus to wash his feet. Peter is the one who makes the great confession. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. You're the Messiah. Peter's confession that Jesus is the Son of God is basically, after 2,000 years, the only thing that we all seem to be able to agree on as Christians. Peter is also the only one who gets rebuked by Jesus heavily, more sternly than any of the other disciples. Maybe that's because he's closest to Jesus. The closer you are to me, naturally, I'm going to tell it like it is when you're out of line. So if I can just give you a category for how to think of Peter, I think that Peter is Jesus' best friend. He's his best friend on earth. There are more miracles done for Peter than anyone else. He gets 2 miraculous catches of fish. Jesus heals his mother-in-law, not because he was mad at Peter, because he was trying to help him, okay? He gets to... Some of you liked that joke a little too much. You liked it a little too much. I'm not going to tell on you, though. Peter walks on water. He gets the coin out of the fish's mouth because Jesus wants to pay his taxes for him. Of course, he's his best friend. He's going to, pay his taxes. Peter cuts off the guy's ear, the guard that comes to arrest Jesus, and, Peter takes a sword and cuts off his ear. Jesus covers for him, covers for his best friend, gets him out of trouble by healing the guy's ear. Now, Peter was going to defend Jesus to the end. That's why he cut the guy's ear off, but Jesus says, no, Peter, don't fight. We're not fighting. And then after Jesus is arrested, you think about it, everybody else runs off, but not Peter. Peter doesn't run off, does he? He tries to follow Jesus. He tries to stick with Jesus, albeit at a distance a little bit. Peter follows the mob close enough to keep his eyes on where Jesus is going, all the way to the high priest's house. And that's when it happened. The thing that Peter is perhaps most famous for, of all the things that I mentioned about Peter, the one thing that stands out above all the rest is this moment where he enters the courtyard of the high priest's house and he denies Jesus. And this, in many ways, is the filter through which we see Peter. A lot of the times we see Peter through the filter of failure. A lot of times he's opening up his big mouth, making mistakes. And then, of all things, he denies Jesus. And you probably never thought of Peter as Jesus' best friend, even though that's what all 4 Gospels kind of show us, that Peter is closest to Jesus in that way. And the moment that looms larger than any other is when Peter's gathered around that fire and the girl, the servant in the high priest's house, says, "You were with Jesus." He says, "No, I don't even know who you're talking about. I don't know Jesus." "No, you were with Jesus." And then he denies him again. Then he denies him again. "I don't even know the man." Can you imagine what kind of spiral of depression and despair and regret that Peter must have experienced? I mean, because Jesus not only his Messiah and Lord, but his best friend. He betrayed him. He must have replayed that scene over and over and over again. And you think Peter, if he thought, if I could just see Jesus one more time, this is what I'd say. I bet he had that ready. This is what I'd tell him if I had one more chance. And now if you pause kind of in that moment with Peter, I want you to imagine Jesus and Peter meeting again. What would you feel like if you saw Jesus again? Would you be conflicted? You'd be overjoyed that Jesus was alive, but wouldn't the filter of your failure overshadow any meeting you had with Jesus? And I want to read to you what happens just a few days later. This was probably 10 to 15 days later after Jesus' resurrection. And this is not the first time that Peter sees Jesus, but this is the story that John tells us about Peter and Jesus. It says in John 21, verse 1, "Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. 'I'm going out to fish,' Simon Peter told them. And they said, 'We'll go with you.' So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples didn't realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, 'Friends, haven't you any fish?' 'No,' they answered. He said, 'Throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you'll find some.' And when they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, 'It is the Lord.' As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, 'It is the Lord,' he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat." We'll read more in a minute, but you see Peter jumping in the water there. And what you have to get your head around in this scene is that when Peter jumps out of the boat to see Jesus, there isn't a molecule of hesitation in Peter. Not one iota of reluctance in his heart. He's just going to run towards Jesus without any hesitation. Peter is so eager to get there, he can't possibly wait for all this fishing business to be finished, so he just puts on his clothes, which is a little strange. We're not sure why. I think maybe Peter thought, "I'm going to walk on water again, guys. You watch this." I'll put on my clothes and just go walking to Jesus. He doesn't. He falls in the water. We're not sure why he puts on his clothes. Maybe that's it. Maybe he thought he was going to walk on water, or maybe he's just not thinking clearly, How could this be? Why doesn't Peter hesitate at all? He just leaps in the water. I got to get to Jesus. What about Peter's failure? What about him denying ever knowing Jesus? Does that not factor into the relationship with Jesus at all? No, it doesn't. It's nowhere to be found. In fact, the most amazing thing about Peter's denials, incredible and powerful thing about Peter's denials, is that we never, ever, not one time, ever hear about Peter's denials ever again. After the cross, Peter's denials are never mentioned by anyone. It's like his failure is no more. It's like it doesn't even figure into his relationship with Jesus. Now, what you have to realize is that by this point, yes, Peter and Jesus have met before this point. This was not the first time that Jesus and Peter met. So it's not like the first time that they're seeing each other after the denial. They had already had a private meeting where Jesus had appeared only to Peter. We are not told what happened at that meeting. We're just told that it took place. And it's the first meeting that Jesus had with Peter. And I think that's where Jesus forgave Peter and they were reconciled. But the point is, this is still only a couple of weeks later. And the filter of failure is now nowhere to be found. And it's because in between Peter's denial and Peter's fishing expedition is the cross of Jesus Christ. And the point of the cross is that God does not look at you through the filter of your failures anymore, nor through the filter of your guilt or your shame or your mistake or your regret or your falling short. Once you place your trust in a crucified Savior who died for you, the filter through which God sees you is the cross of Jesus Christ. That's a miracle. And one of the most beautiful things about this story is that Jesus is appearing to Peter on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. I love that. I love that it happens at the same place where it all began. It's the exact same spot. It's the shores of the Sea of Galilee where Jesus first called Peter 3 years earlier, where it all began. There, fishing on the Sea of Galilee. Jesus appears to Peter and takes him back to the very beginning. Takes him back to day one. Takes him back to the day that Peter said yes to following Jesus. And the fact that Jesus arranges everything to perform the exact same miracle that he performed when he first met Simon, read about it in Luke chapter 5, is just saying, this is a fresh start. This is a new beginning. This is like Jesus saying to Peter, let's start over. Let's go back to day one. That's what I want you to hear. That's what I want you to know. Jesus Christ is in the business of fresh starts and new beginnings. And every day that you wake up and turn toward the grace of Jesus Christ, every day can be day one. None of the other stuff filters in because God's grace is new every morning. His mercies are there every morning. It doesn't matter if you're a brand new Christian or if you've been a Jesus follower for decades. Every day, you need fresh mercy. And his mercy is new every day. And so every day can be day one. Jesus is always giving us the grace to live this day trusting him as if it were a new beginning. Free from guilt, free from shame, free from the past. And that's what this was for Peter. This was day one. Jesus was starting over with him. Now there's more to it. He wasn't just starting over, because there's more to it just than starting fresh. It gets even better than a new beginning because more is about to happen. When all the disciples get back to shore, something else happens as a part of the new beginning. And John writes this, verse 8. The other disciples followed him in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards. And when they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you've just caught. So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Here they all are, gathered around a fire. And in this story, the last time Peter had been gathered around the fire was in the courtyard of the high priest's house, denying Jesus 3 times. And now Jesus is going to ask Peter a question around a fire 3 times. He says, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. Jesus was making a point the third time. Peter knew it. There's something about this exchange that reinstates Peter, that on the other side of his denial, it gives him an opportunity to declare his allegiance 3 times. But this is also a commission. Jesus is also giving Peter a task. And what Jesus asks of Peter is to express his love to Jesus. How? Feed my sheep. Take care of my lambs. Tend the flock. Care for others. Show your love for me in how you serve and tend and care for others of my children. Show your love for me. Do you love me? Yes. Okay. Feed my lambs. Tend my sheep. And I think there's a reason that Jesus brings Peter back to this most basic idea, because often the way to start again is to simply return to love. I think that's a good place to start. It's where he starts with Peter, to begin again with love for God, demonstrated and expressed in love for others. Maybe that's where we all need to begin again. Maybe that's where you need to begin again, with love. Because when the question is put to you directly, it puts you on the spot. The question actually creates an unresolved tension. You don't feel it because I'm not asking you the question, but if I were to ask you the question pointedly, church, do you love Jesus? What about you over here? What about you over here? Do you love Jesus? You feel that? There's a tension when the question is put to you. And if you say, yes, I do love Jesus, then the exchange has to resolve some way. What then? And the way that Jesus resolves it is to say, if you love me, take care of my sheep. Love this one and this one and this one that I've given you to love. Not for their sake alone, but because of something else, as a response to the depth of my grace toward you. He wasn't just calling Peter to love he was calling Peter to love as a response to the grace that he was showing Peter. Because what you have to see here is Peter's love is tied directly to Peter's denials, isn't it? Peter's love is tied directly to Peter's denials. It's around the fire. He asks him 3 times. So what's that link? The fact that Jesus is asking 3 times is not just reinstating Peter. It's also taking the very thing that should disqualify Peter and turning it into a story about grace. A story about how Peter's love is all the greater, not in spite of great failure, but because of the experience of great failure, which is followed by the experience of even greater grace. Great love was not in spite of the failure. It was because of the failure and then the experience of grace that Peter loved all the more. Maybe that's why Jesus said, do you love me more than these? I don't know. Maybe there's something to that. Do you think after this experience that Peter went around being critical or finding fault with everyone else and withholding grace and forgiveness to others? No, probably not. Because the depth of his denial becomes now the depth of his love for Jesus and for others. Because that's the depth of the grace he experienced. Jesus calls Peter to begin again with love. And then very strangely, and I mean very unexpectedly, I think, because I'm reading this passage and I could just end it right there, with the, okay, feed my sheep. But Jesus isn't done yet. And very unexpectedly, Jesus tells Peter how he's going to die. Now, is this the moment you would have picked for that? Not me. I wouldn't have thought of that. I would have thought, what we need here? We need a revelation about how you're going to bite the dust. No, I think we're having a nice moment around the fire. I've said, do you love me? Now I'm going to tell you how you're going to die. No, I just don't feel like they go together. But somehow, Jesus did. And I think there's a link. We'll try to work it out here, because I think there's a reason this is here. But in verse 18, Jesus said, okay, so feed my sheep in verse 17. But then verse 18 is, very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands. Stretch out your hands. That's a reference to crucifixion. And someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, follow me. Jesus is telling Peter that he would be crucified. This is what love for Jesus and love for others would require. The path of love would require great sacrifice, sacrificing his very life. To begin again with love will mean sacrifice. It's kind of a grim pronouncement for Peter. But then in the very shadow of what must have been a terrifying realization that he's going to be crucified, Jesus says something else. Follow me. And those words take on entirely new meaning when Jesus has been to the cross and come out on the other side resurrected. Follow me now means I've been there. And something changes, something shifts when those 2 words enter the picture. It's not a demand that Peter do better. It's not an invitation to try again. It's even better than a fresh start. It's an invitation to surrender. to say, this next part of your life, you're going to have to surrender to me. It's going to mean death, but follow me. Surrender to the leadership of Jesus to say, thy will be done this week, this day, this year. And that's his invitation to you. Again, it's not an invitation to do better this year or to do more this year. It's not an invitation to manage your life more efficiently. It's an invitation to surrender to whatever God has for you this year. To say, thy will be done. God, whatever you have for me, I'm going to surrender to you. And it seems at first like the call to love and the invitation to surrender don't go together, but maybe they do. There's this old Quaker writer named Hannah Whitall Smith. She wrote this book called The Christian's Secret of a Happy Life. And she writes a story in that book about going to a hospital for those with disabilities and seeing children in an exercise class. And even though the leader is doing all of these motions and exercises, the children are not coordinated and they're weak, and none of the children really had the ability or the coordination or the strength to follow perfectly the motions of the leader in the class, except for one little girl who did the motions perfectly, but not because she was the strongest, but because she was the weakest. So weak that the leader stood behind her and controlled all of her movements, so that all she had to do was surrender to the motions that the leader was making for her. She was the only one who could truly follow because she was the only one who was free from managing her own self. It might be that until we've surrendered ourselves, it will be difficult to truly love others selflessly and sacrificially. Because the great burden that we have to carry in life is ourself. We carry it around all the time. The most difficult thing you have to manage is self. Our own temperament and our own feelings and our own inward affairs and perplex us and worry us and all of those things more than anything else. Which means in order to love someone else, the first burden you need to offload is yourself. Because you can't manage you and I can't manage me. And my only hope is to say, Lord, I abandon myself to you. I've tried every way I can to manage myself and to make myself what I ought to be, but I always fail, so I'm just going to surrender to you. Whatever you have for me, whatever you're going to do in me this year, I'm going to surrender to that. Lord, your will be done, even if it hurts. Surrender your failures because, hey, your shame is going to keep you from loving others truly, isn't it? And surrender your successes to the Lord because your pride will do the same. And surrender your worries because they crowd out concern for others. Surrender your plans so that interruptions don't make it hard to love someone. Surrender yourself. And then love. Let's start there this new year. Every day is day one. And the invitation is to surrender all to him so that our movements this year look more and more like his love. Let's pray.